Can subliminal messages actually affect the way you think? Subliminal messages are any stimuli, usually words or images, that are displayed for a very, very short amount of time, usually just 3/100ths of a second, or 30 milliseconds. This is long enough to activate many core areas of our brain, such as visual processing, emotional activation, memory recognition, but not long enough for us to consciously recognize what we're seeing or hearing. Most films these days run about 30 frames per second, meaning that each frame is exposed for about 3/100ths of a second. So in essence, most of the frames that you're getting fed right now, even through this video, are activating your brain subliminally. So what you're consciously seeing is sort of a mushed together composite of all these still images. So if I were to show you something for just one frame, that's usually enough to activate most of the areas of your brain, but not quite enough for you to consciously recognize what you're seeing. And this is something that filmmakers have been doing for a long time. In fact, if you go back to old Warner Brothers cartoons, you can find examples of subliminal messages that are very intentional. So for example, in the old cartoon Wisecracking Duck, which took place in 1943, so during World War II, Daffy Duck goes around and spins the shield of a statue, and just for one frame, you see in big bold letters, "Buy bonds." Because of course that was what the US was trying to do, is get people to buy bonds to support the war effort. And you can also see in some other Warner Brothers cartoons, some less patriotic imagery being displayed, again for just one frame. And this actually has started a whole legacy. For decades now, cartoonists have been slipping in some salacious imagery into their cartoons. I don't think they could get away with it much anymore now that people have Blu-rays and can stop and look at films frame by frame, but this used to be kind of a fun thing that cartoonists would do to amuse themselves. Subliminal messages started to get a lot more attention in the US in 1957 when this guy named James Vickery came along. He was a market researcher who put in these little subliminal messages in movies. So during trailers at the beginning of movies, he would put in blocks of letters like "hungry, eat popcorn," and "thirsty, drink Coca-Cola," and he would slip them in for just one frame, just 1/30th of a second, so that moviegoers couldn't consciously tell that they were seeing anything at all. But he said when he put these subliminal messages in movies, that concession stands of popcorn, and specifically Coca-Cola, went up through the roof. And this garnered a lot of attention. He went on a bunch of radio and talk shows and talked about these amazing results, and he ended up being somewhat of a marketing guru. By the end of his career, he had made over $4 million on this one idea. These results by James Vickery sparked a lot of interest in subliminal messages, but also sparked widespread hysteria over the supposed power of subliminal messages. So during the Cold War time that quickly followed, people were really worried that the Russians might get a hold of, for example, television broadcast signals and slip in little messages, for example, like this: "Kill the president," or something like that. And wouldn't that make everybody around the world, kids to the elderly, get up zombie-like from their couches and wander over to the White House to try to assassinate the president? People were honestly worried about this. By the 1970s, the FCC had received so many complaints and worries from citizens worried that people were slipping in subliminal messages into their TV, film, and radio programs that the FCC pledged from 1974 on that it would formally investigate any cases of subliminal marketing or messages. And actually, to date, there has been no prosecutions of anyone who has tried to slip in any subliminal messages into our airways. It turns out, in retrospect, all of this widespread hysteria and interest in subliminal messages was really unwarranted. It was all based off this old James Vickery study, which actually never even happened. He even later admitted in an interview that he'd made the whole thing up. So it turns out that after he had published his results, a lot of other scientists came along and tried to replicate it, but none of them could get his results. None of them found that just displaying things like "hungry, eat popcorn" had any effect at all on popcorn sales. So, in retrospect, it seems like subliminal messages maybe don't have any power at all, but this sparked interest in subliminal messages led to a lot of research that uncovered that in certain circumstances, subliminal imagery and words can actually have a pretty big impact, even on consumer behavior. One of the first studies to reveal the true power of subliminal messages was back in 2002. And when they simply sought to find out if subliminal messages could actually make people thirstier, owing to the fact that James Vickery claimed that by displaying words like "thirsty," he could make people subjectively thirstier and more likely to buy drinks. So what they did is they had participants come in and, much like James Vickery supposedly had done, expose them for 3/100ths of a second to words like thirsty, arid, dry, parched, all these words to try to engender thirst in participants, but all participants knew was that they were looking at a computer screen, asked to fixate on the center of it, and had no idea that they were being exposed to these words. Then after this, participants took a mood inventory with one of these questions asking on a scale of 1 to 7, how thirsty are you? And then as a thank you gift, they were offered a glass of ice-cold Kool-Aid, but this was carefully measured per milliliter to figure out how much exactly participants were drinking in each condition. What they found was that these subliminal messages didn't seem to have any effect on participants' subjective thirst or how much Kool-Aid they drank. But in sort of a twist on this study, they had half the participants come in thirsty. They had asked them to not drink anything for the preceding 3 hours. And what they found was that when participants came in somewhat thirsty, these subliminal messages actually had a very big impact in accentuating and exaggerating their subjective feeling of thirst and actually causing them to drink more Kool-Aid. So this research suggests that subliminal messages might not be able to create emotions and drives and motivations in and of themselves, but if people come in somewhat motivated or with somewhat of an emotion, subliminal messages might be able to accentuate or exaggerate those. A few years later, other researchers came along and sought to figure out if subliminal messages could not only do things like increase feelings of thirst, but actually point consumers toward a specific brand, for example, Lipton iced tea. So what these researchers did is replicated the study where half the participants were coming in thirsty and half not thirsty, and then this time exposing them to subliminal images and messages of Lipton iced tea. At the very end of the study, they offered participants Lipton iced tea and another generic iced tea brand, and they found that if people came in thirsty and were again subliminally exposed to images and words of Lipton iced tea, they were much more likely to choose that specific brand over the generic brand. So in this case, it shows that subliminal messages might work to not only accentuate feelings, emotions, motivations, and drives, but also to point people in the right direction to fulfill those drives. Showing this effect in the real world, one study looked at jackpot machines in Las Vegas that were set to subliminally prime people with images such as dollar signs and the words jackpot while they played at the slot game. And what they found was that when these subliminal images hit gamblers, it caused them to bet 55% more money and also caused 45% increases in gamblers thinking that they were going to walk away a winner. So in this case, this is the perfect storm of circumstances to really show off the power of subliminal messages. They have someone who's coming in already willing to gamble, and by showing them images like dollar signs and jackpot, they're able to exaggerate that motivation and that consumer behavior. Now you might be thinking, don't we have safeguards against this sort of thing? Well, the only safeguard we have is the FCC willing to investigate any subliminal messages that make their way onto public TV, radio, or film. But in this case, if you walk into a casino, they own their own media, so they can expose you to all the subliminal messages that they want. The same is true if you walk into any consumer establishment. So in this way, expect to be subliminally primed with images and words in the near future. For example, when you walk into the grocery store, it might not be uncommon to show displays, electronic displays, that subliminally prime people with words like hunger. Because studies show that if people walk into a grocery store hungry, and especially if that hunger is accentuated, they're likely to make more impulse buys. So if you can get at someone who is thirsty and can prime them with thirst-related words, and then, for example, an image of a Coke can, you might be able to make them actually be more likely to buy Coca-Cola to satisfy that thirst. Or if someone's coming in already willing to, for example, buy tennis shoes, so they're at Payless, and then you subliminally expose them to images of certain types of shoe brands, they might be more likely to buy that particular type of shoe brand. So should we be truly concerned that advertisers or marketers are going to make us consumer zombies? That they're going to take over our brain and make us buy whatever they want by subliminally priming us with certain images and words? Probably not at this point. In order to do just that, marketers would have to get a bit better at tracking our current drives and motivations in order to capitalize on them at just the right time. Although it's likely that the day is coming when they can do just that. With ever more ubiquitous availability of GPS information, Bluetooth-enabled devices, and social networking apps that are always on and right in your pocket, advertisers and companies are likely to soon become extremely proficient at tracking our consumer behavior and perhaps even knowing what we're likely to buy before we are. In fact, Amazon is getting so confident in its ability to predict and even influence consumer decisions that they're starting to roll out a new program where they're going to be shipping products to customers even before customers buy them. If this program is successful, it would allow Amazon to get purchases to customers sooner, even sometimes the same day that a product is ordered. So in the near future, with advances in consumer tracking and really individualized marketing campaigns, even including things like subliminal messages, it might be really difficult to not become a consumer zombie.